I suppose we all desire most the things we do not possess. In my case, this has been particularly true. My wife is quite short, with a rounded figure, not by any means fat, and blonde hair. In contrast, Penny is tall and angular with dark hair. And I feel strongly attracted to both of them. Similarly, Penny's husband is short whereas I am very tall. His skin is tanned while mine is paler. For a full 10 years our two families got on well together, kids about the same age, interests similar. It's true that, when I sat next to Penny at dinner parties, the conversation often took on a friend nature, until one New Year party when I realized that, gradually but undeniably, something had significantly changed. Looking back, I can now see how it began with small things, holding on to me just a fraction longer than she used to when kissing goodnight on the cheek, occasionally accidentally not turning her head far enough at the end of an evening so we kissed slightly on the lips by mistake. Nothing concrete, but in retrospect a frisson was definitely developing. Of course, I failed to spot this at the time. Gradually, when making arrangements for our families to meet, or to help with each other's kids, it became my mobile phone that Penny called or sent texts to rather than my wife's. Text conversations involved more than just one or two practical sentences. Penny's messages began to end with an X. Only small things again, but gradually they added up to a distinct change in the nature of my relationship with her. And because it happened slowly, it had become bedded in long before either of us realized it. It was only after one long, slightly drunken Friday night dinner party at the house of mutual friends that things suddenly changed in a way that even I couldn't miss. Penny seldom drinks, but that night she and her husband had been given a lift to the dinner by some other guests, so Penny was free to have a few glasses of wine. Amusingly, she gets giggly after only a couple of glasses and, predictably sitting next to me, she became a little tipsy quite early on. We had been discussing the holiday that our two families were planning to go on together in the summer. I had gathered together a bag of brochures and had shortlisted half a dozen to select from. Penny's husband always lets her choose their holidays, and my wife leaves the decisions to me, so it was normal and natural for the two of us to talk them over. I offered to give Penny the bag of brochures I had brought with me, together with my handwritten notes, so she could look them over and tell me what she thought. That was when things changed. Penny put her hand on mine and a slightly odd look came over her face. Her voice when she spoke was low and conspiratorial. "No," she said. "Bring them over on Monday after the kids have gone to school." I was silent for a minute. A little tipsy myself, I wasn't sure I had understood her correctly. "Monday morning?" I asked, testing the situation. "So Paul can see them too?" "Paul will have gone off with the kids," Penny whispered, a little drunkenly, a meaningful smile on her face. She squeezed my hand under the table and turned to chat to the friend on her other side. I sat back, bemused. The rest of the dinner passed off without event, but by the time we were all standing in the hallway saying our "thank you" and "good nights," I was beginning to doubt whether there had been any message at all. The guests walked as an elongated group along the long driveway to our cars, the night dark and moonless around us. My wife turned as she opened the car door and Penny gave her a goodnight peck on the cheek. I shook hands with Paul, both of us slurring our words slightly. As Penny casually leaned towards me for the usual farewell kiss, I had decided that it had all been an illusion brought on by too much good wine. But then as I bent to kiss her goodnight, she turned her head, it had to be deliberately, and I found myself kissing her on the lips. She pulled away suddenly, smiling. "See you on Monday," he whispered. "Sleep well." I stood speechless until my wife's voice brought me to my senses. I sat in the car and she drove us home. Not surprisingly I spent the rest of the weekend with a belly full of butterflies, unsure whether Penny had really invited me to be with her, and even less sure whether I should take up the invitation if there had been one. No. I wasn't unsure, I knew full well I shouldn't, but I equally knew I had to see if I had been right. I had never cheated on my wife before, despite a number of opportunities. Besides, I had always thought of Penny more like a sister than a friend. Suddenly, to my horror, I realized that this made the idea even more exciting. I spent an anxious Sunday and a restless Sunday. By the time I went to bed on Sunday night I had convinced myself that it had all been a misunderstanding and that I wasn't interested in her anyway. By the time I woke in the morning, however, I knew I had to at least see if I had been right. So on Monday morning at 7:30 a.m., I parked my car just round the corner from Penny's house on a busy through road where it would not attract attention. I waited patiently, half listening to the news on the radio and watching the driveway until I saw the automatic wooden gates swing inwards, and her husband's car, full of children, leave for school. I had told my wife that I had an early appointment with a customer in Leeds and had left the house early myself. She had no reason to suspect. Early appointments happened on a weekly basis. I fired up the engine and quickly nipped through the open gates and up the long straight driveway to the front door. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the gates swing shut behind me. Drawing to a halt, I pulled on the hand brake and stepped nervously out of my car. I looked around carefully. The house seemed deserted as I took my plastic bag of brochures out of the back seat and looked up at the windows. The room I knew to be their master bedroom had its curtains drawn. Suddenly there was movement behind the drapes and I thought I saw a face. It disappeared just as suddenly. Nervously I adjusted my tie. I crossed to the red front door and knocked softly. There was no response. I knocked a little harder and thought I could just make out the sound of running feet inside the house. There was a fumbling at the door, it opened a few inches then stopped, held by the security chain. Through the gap, I could just make out Penny's face. She didn't smile. My heart sank. "Hi Penny." I stammered, trying vainly to keep a casual note in my voice. The door closed in my face. Oh God! I thought, have I made a mistake? Did I misread her messages? But then I heard a rattling as the security chain was unfastened and the door slowly swung open. Penny stood inside, her eyes on mine. There was a strange look on her face which did not at first reassure me. "Is this a bad time?" I asked, giving us both the chance to back out, or for me to pretend I'd come for some other reason. Penny just grinned in an embarrassed manner. "Has that been deliberate?" Oh God! I thought. Perhaps I was right. "Come in," she whispered and, with my belly alive with butterflies, I entered the hall. "I've brought those holiday brochures for you," I said nervously, my voice squeaking stupidly as she closed the front door behind me. "Thanks." Penny smiled. "Have you got time for a coffee?" I looked at my watch. Stupid again. I knew exactly what the time was and how long I could stay. "Please," I replied. Penny led the way down the short corridor and into her large, sun-filled kitchen. I followed her, still frantically seeking signs that I'd not been mistaken. I noticed her nicely brushed hair. That certainly wasn't how it had been when she had got out of bed. Was that a sign too? As Penny filled the kettle, I placed the bag of brochures down on the wooden kitchen table. "There are a few choices in here. But it's difficult to find properties big enough for us all," I said, trying to maintain the pretense it was an innocent visit. I was pleased that my voice sounded a little more normal. Penny crossed to the table, accidentally brushing against me as she passed. I stood my ground close to the table, still nervous and unsure, looking for a clear signal, any signal. She thumbed through the top two brochures, her conversation remained practical, to the point. Perhaps I had made a big mistake. Perhaps I hadn't, but she'd changed her mind. Perhaps. I was brought to my senses as, across the room, the kettle began to boil noisily. Penny stood up slowly, brushing against me once again, and went to make the coffee. The stomach-tingling smell of her perfume wafted past me again. I felt sick with excitement. She to me spoke over the machine's din. "I think the Victorian cottage in the blue brochure would be nice." Penny continued as if unaware of the effect her presence was having on me. But then a seaside place would be nice too. Oh hell. She swore under her breath. What the matter? I asked, crossing over to where she stood. I can't get the lid open. Can you have a go? She asked. Always pleased to play the big strong male, I smiled and, standing close by Penny, took hold of the machine's stainless steel lid. She grasped the grinder's body tightly and made a show of bracing herself. Got it? I asked. Penny nodded. It turned very easily. It had not been jammed. I looked at Penny, puzzled. And she kissed me. On the lips. Full and purposeful. No accident. It was as if a long closed door had burst open. I thought you were never going to make a move. Her eyes were bright and lively. She kissed me playfully on the lips again. How obvious did I need to make it? I felt very silly, my face flushing red with embarrassment. Penny grinned and kissed me on the mouth once again. I rose to my feet. Penny took my hand, I hers, and led me out of the kitchen and up the stairs to where I knew the guest room to be. Can you guess what happens next? A tin later, there were tears running down her cheeks. Penny. I whispered, hugging her close again. What's wrong? She shook her head. Nothing. Tell me. Please. I insisted. It's just that I've never cheated on Paul before. It was lovely, and I planned it, and it was just as good as I dreamed it would be, but I've never. She left the words hanging in the air. Oh, Penny. I said, trying to comfort her. It's my first time too, and I feel as guilty as you do. She looked me in the face. Not quite as guilty, though. I started it. She protested. But I don't regret it, Penny. What we've just done is natural between two old friends who... Who what? She asked. Well, who have loved each other from a distance for a long time. We lay in silence for a while. An hour later I was in my car, driving east to my meeting, rather later than I had told my wife. My head was dizzy with the events of the morning. I did feel a strong sense of guilt. After all, I had never cheated on my wife before. But somehow this didn't feel like cheating. I had known Penny for so long.